Okay, so we're going to move on into our next unit with this video. This is the very first video of the next unit, so we're just going to get really basic introductory kind of stuff. In fact, I hope everything we're going to talk about in this video is going to be a review of things you've done in other math classes. Okay, so remember the way we're approaching the subject of algebra is we're using a spiraling technique. So we started by talking about expressions. And expressions were something that we learned how to simplify and evaluate and things like that. We learned about different kinds of expressions like linear expressions and polynomial expressions and things. But anyway, we became masters of expressions. Then we moved on to equations, and equations were two expressions that were equal to each other. So we still had to be able to work with expressions, but with equations, that opened us up to be able to do more things like solve equations and things like that. But we still had like linear equations and quadratic equations and other things. So what we found was all these concepts that we learned with expressions carried over into working with equations. And it reinforced each other. And that's the whole idea of the spiraling technique, is it lets us revisit the same idea lots of times from lots of different angles, hopefully helping you to remember it better. So now we're going to move on to the next piece of our spiral. And the next piece of our spiral is graphing. Okay, so this is something you've done before, but it's something that as long as you can connect it back to equations and expressions, graphing is it's almost an intuitive thing, the way that those things connect together. It's not exactly intuitive, and there's definitely some tricky spots, but it connects very nicely to those other concepts. And so what we'll see are things that we had to do with expressions and equations. We'll have to do some of those things with graphing as well. All right, so with that all said, let's get started by taking a look at the learning objectives for this video. So like I said, we're just going to go back to some basic review concepts in this video, and this should all be things you've learned before. The first thing is a working system of what the coordinate system, and you may have learned different names for this. The official name is the Cartesian coordinate system, but whatever it is, if you don't remember the name, that's fine, as long as you know how to use it. And specifically in the coordinate system, you're going to need to be able to know the difference between the two axes. You're going to need to be able to talk about the different quadrants and recognize which quadrant is which. The origin is going to probably be the most important point in the entire coordinate system, so you definitely need to know where that is. And then once you know where the origin is, you should be able to plot other points or to describe points using ordered pairs. Okay, so we're going to start with that, and that's what this video is going to cover. I am going to make a second video with examples of how to graph things using a table of values. Okay, but really this is all the table of values is just a continuation of ordered pairs is all that is. So I'm putting all these learning objectives together in a single lesson. All right, so with that said, let's get started by talking about axes and the coordinate system. All right, so you have in other classes, and even in our class, you've worked with number lines before. And so we're familiar with number lines. The number lines traditionally have a positive side on the right and negative side on the left. And we know that you can graph any real number on this number line, right? So obviously I can graph 1 and I can graph 2 and I can graph 3, but I can graph 3.5. If I just go halfway between 3 and 4, I could graph 3.5. Even though it's not labeled, it's still part of the graph. If I'm really careful and tricky, I could even go just a little bit past 3 and I could graph a number like pi, 3.14159, right? Because there's definitely a 3.1, there's definitely a 3.2. Somewhere in between there is going to be 3.14. And so I can graph pi, okay? The only numbers that we can't graph are imaginary numbers, okay? There actually has been developed a method for graphing imaginary numbers, but you can't do it with a number line. And so in our class, we're basically done working with imaginary numbers at that point. Certainly when it comes to graphing, we're only going to use real numbers while we graph. Okay, now this we've done before, graphing a single number on a number line. What's new for us right now is we're going to take a second number line. So here I've got a second number line, and you can see I've written the number sideways, but it's the same basic number line, right? I can line all these numbers up, right? And it's the same number line, even though I've written the numbers sideways, it's the same number line, okay? Well, the reason why I wrote it sideways is because if I take two number lines and I rotate them so they're at 90 degrees from each other, then that is what makes the coordinate system, okay? And so the coordinate system is just simply two number lines that have been put together. One number line describes right and left motion or position, or depending on the context. And the other number line describes vertical, up and down motion, okay? So we've got horizontal position and we've got vertical position. Horizontal goes across, just like we talk about the horizon is the line where the sun sets, right? Horizontal goes across, vertical goes up and down, right? We talk about basketball players have a big vertical leap, right? So vertical is up and down, horizontal is across, all right? And these two things get names. Our horizontal axis is called the x-axis, traditionally, and usually when we're graphing things, anything that has an x-coordinate, we put on the x-axis horizontally. And then our vertical axis traditionally is known as the y-axis, okay? Now, I will say, depending on context, we might change the name. If our equations don't have x's and y's, then our graph won't have x's and y's. If our equations have a's and b's, then our graph will have a's and b's, okay? We'll deal with those things as they come up. For right now, we'll just talk about x's and y's. All right, so I've got two axes. One that's horizontal, it's the x-axis. One that's vertical, it's the y-axis. All right, I also have 4 quadrants. Okay, so 4 quadrants. You can see that this axis divides the graph up into 4 parts. So there's a part up here in the top right. There's a part over here, here, and here. There's 4 parts, okay? Each of those parts can be numbered, and that lets us talk about the 4 parts. First of all, if you take something and you cut it into 4 parts, 4, you might be familiar with quad, means 4. So we call these things quadrants, okay? So we have 4 quadrants. And the way that I remember the number system for the quadrant is I draw a capital C, C for coordinates, C for coordinates. So if I draw a C, I always start in the top right-hand corner and I draw a C. Okay, that's how I make C's. That's also the way that we number our coordinate or quadrants. Number 1 goes here. Traditionally, we use Roman numerals. I'm honestly not 100% sure why we use Roman numerals, but traditionally that's what we use. So in the top right is 1, because that's where I would start my C. The next place my C would go is quadrant 2, that's the top left. Then down here in quadrant 3, bottom left, and we're going to finish over here in quadrant 4. Whoops, that's a 6. Quadrant 4 is where we're going to finish. Okay, so these are our 4 quadrants that are created by the axes, right? So that's the basic idea of the coordinate system. Okay, now we need to start talking about points, how we use the coordinate system to draw things. And everything is based on counting, just like on a number line, right? So when we count on a number line, if I'm going to 2, I start at 0 and I count 2, or I start at 0 and I count 2. Now we have to pay attention to, am I counting up or am I counting down? Okay, but we're always starting at 0, and so does both in the up and down direction and the left direction. 0 is in the same spot. And because that's where we start counting from, that spot where the 2 zeros are, we call that spot the origin. We call that spot the origin. And we describe the position using the up and down and right and left numbers. And so we would say that's at 0, 0, because both in the right and left direction and in the up and down direction, we've moved 0. And so we call that 0, 0. So that's the origin. That's where we start counting from. But then from there, we can count anywhere we want to place a point. Now, traditionally, when we do ordered pairs, we put them in alphabetical order, generally speaking. And since this is an X and this is a Y, X comes before Y. So this is my X and this is my Y, okay? Or horizontal comes before vertical. Again, that's alphabetical order. Horizontal comes before vertical. X comes before Y, right? So when we look at ordered pairs, the first number is always telling me how I go across, and the second number is always telling me how I go up and down. So the way we plot a point is we take an ordered pair, we put some numbers in there. This number is telling me my X or my horizontal or my across position, and this is telling me my up and down. So starting from the origin, this would say go across to the right 1, because remember it's +1 and positive numbers go to the right on our number line. So we go to the right 1, so I would move over here. And then we're going to go up 2. So from here, I'm going to go up 2. So we would end up right there, over 1 to the right and up 2, okay? So notice direction is important. If I was going to go over 1 to the left, then that would be a -1. And if I was going to go down, that would be a -2, okay? So -1, -2 is going to go over 1 to the left and then down 2. And that would be my -2, okay? So with this coordinate system, we can describe the position of any point, or if we know the description of its location, then we can graph it, okay? So this is how we would graph it: move over, move up, or move right, left, move up, down, okay? If I pick some random point on the graph, let's say this point right here, now I can describe that, okay? So from the origin, did I move right or left? Well, I moved left, which means I'm going to have a negative x number. How far did I move? 1, 2, 3, 4. I moved 4. So my x number of this point right here is going to be a -4. And then I moved up. How far up did I go? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I moved up 6. And so those are my coordinates for -4, 6. Okay, so I think all of that should be a review for you. The main thing here to make sure is that you're very comfortable with the vocabulary: which axis is which, horizontal is X, vertical is Y, which quadrant is which. I use the C method to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Where is the origin? It's where the axes cross. And then how do you label points and name points, okay? So that's the main idea to take away from this video. As I said, I am going to make a second video. And in the second video, we're going to draw graphs using tables. And in that video, we'll have to do lots more practice with points. So if you felt like you didn't get quite enough practice with this video, you're going to get more in the next video. But then we'll also talk about how those points connect together to make graphs, which is something we have not done here. All right, so thanks for watching this. Be sure that you watch the next video as well. Have a good one.